Hello, everyone, and welcome to PCR's May Virtual Transition Times. My name is Melissa Wyman, and I am PCR's Respite Care and Community Engagement Director. I will be your moderator this evening, so please feel free to send any questions or comments in the chat box below. We are delighted to offer this presentation with American Sign Language simultaneous interpretation. We will also be offering this presentation with Spanish simultaneous interpretation. To access the channel in Spanish, click Interpretation in the meeting controls and select the Spanish channel. Participants in a language channel will hear the translated audio and also the original audio at a lower volume. To hear the interpret language only, click Mute Original Audio. The English and Spanish language versions will be archived on the PCR website Transition Times page. Please share the recording and upcoming Transition Times programs with your friends and others in the community. It is very important to continue to spread the word about Transition Times so we can continue to better serve our community. I want to give a special thanks to Heidi De Paula, PCR volunteer, and Rita Scheinberg, MC Transitions. Just some Zoom tip reminders. We are using the webinar platform, but this will be a special question and answer session. So you can either submit any of your questions in the chat box below or raise your hand and I will open your mic so you can speak. Click Show Captions to see the captions for the webinar. You must select the speaking language you would like to show. We are so fortunate tonight to have Michael Dalto from High Note Consulting. Michael is a Social Security guru with over 35 years of experience, and he has been here many times, and we are so excited because he agreed to do a special program to allow him to answer questions. We know that a lot of times we have the programs and they run literally to the minute, and so we wanted to give the families an opportunity to ask questions. So, Michael?
Thank you very much, Melissa. When my daughter was about 5 years old, she went to the supermarket on a very, very busy holiday weekend with her mom. And the place was jam-packed with people. And her mother said, "Oh, Nora, I get agoraphobic in places like this." And if you're not familiar with all of your psychiatric terminology, agoraphobia is fear of being in public places. But of course, my 5-year-old didn't know that. She just knew that her mother was in some kind of distress and she wanted to comfort her. So she said, "Yeah, mommy, I get agoraphobic too. And if I can find it, I also get ice cream." So my daughter has taught me a lot about making lemonade out of lemons. In this case, the lemon is, we've got very complicated benefit programs with confusing rules. But the lemonade is, PCR has invited me to answer any questions you have. I'm assuming they'll focus primarily on SSI, Social Security, disability, Medicare, Medicaid, how work affects them, how to apply for them, who is eligible, etc. But you can ask any question you like, and I will do my best to answer it. And if I'm unable to answer it, I will get an answer for you afterwards. So I think we're ready.
Okay, perfect. So what we can do, which would be great, if anybody is interested in actually asking a question using your mic, if you can use the raise hand icon below, and then we can, I can get you to open your mic and you can ask a question that way, or you can go in the chat and ask a question. So we do have one question already, and we can start with that. So are IRAs or 401ks considered by SSA in the means test?
Okay, great question, Nate. Now, Nate, I'm assuming that you're referring to the limit on assets, which Social Security calls resources for the SSI program. And I'm going to start answering that way. If I'm not interpreting your question correctly. Okay, great. Thank you. Um, so the SSI program is a benefit based on financial need. It provides a cash benefit from Social Security to people who have a disability or who are at least 65 years old and have limited income and limited assets or resources. Income is money that a person receives in a given month, and there's an income limit. Resources are money that a person has remaining after the month that they received it. So if you get money in one month, it counts as income and it counts against the income limit. If you have any of it left over that carries over into the first day of the next month, that becomes a resource. And that's subject to a limit for unmarried people of $2,000. Not a lot of money. But fortunately, there are some kinds of assets or resources that do not count against that $2,000 limit. And we'll probably get back to those a little bit later. But back to your question, Nate. Are IRAs, 401ks, and for that matter, other kinds of retirement funds, do they count as resources? Do they count against that $2,000 resource limit for SSI? And the answer is generally they do. If the individual who owns the retirement account would have the ability to withdraw money from that account, even if it meant they'd have to pay a tax penalty by doing it, then the money in that retirement account does count against the $2,000 resource limit. But there are some exceptions. If the individual who owns the account could not withdraw money from their account without either quitting their job or having to have an emergency that's not the case for them in order to be allowed to withdraw money, or if they would have to be an age they're not yet. Generally, you have to be 59 and a half to make withdrawals from some retirement funds without an emergency or leaving a job or whatever. But barring those exceptions, the funds in retirement accounts do generally count as resources for the SSI program.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. So first I'm gonna, I see that May has asked a question, so I'm actually gonna allow you to talk, May.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I
Okay,
may.
great. Hello. I have a question. So my daughter received reduced SSI because her part-time job. She is taking a medical leave right now, and we've just been told by Social Security office that she qualified for SSDI. So going through that application process, I understand that by rule you have to do that. My question is, I'm planning to retire in a couple of years. Now, when I retire, does her SSDI go by my income at that time or based on her current
Okay,
earning?
great question, May, and thank you for asking it. I think that'll be relevant to a lot of people on the webinar. So SSDI stands for Social Security Disability Insurance. That is a different cash benefit that people can get from Social Security. They have to be disabled, just like for SSI. It is a cash benefit, just like SSI. But instead of being financially needy, instead of having limited income and resources, to qualify for SSDI, a person has to have what's known as insured status. And that means they have to have worked and paid Social Security taxes on their earnings for a long enough period, Paying Social Security taxes on your earnings is kind of like paying your insurance premiums. That's what qualifies you for SSDI. Now, a person can get SSDI based on their own work history, and it sounds like your daughter, May, is qualifying for SSDI in that way. However, there are two other ways to get Social Security disability insurance. And one is for widows and widowers who are at least 50 years old. I'm not going to cover that. I'm assuming that probably won't apply to anyone or who's here on behalf of a family member this evening. But the other way to get SSDI is on the record of a parent. So it's the parent who worked and paid Social Security taxes on their earnings and got this insured status. So if that's the case, your son or daughter can get SSDI on the record of you, the parent, if your son or daughter meets the following conditions. They have a severe disability that began before age 22. Your son or daughter is an adult, at least 18 years old, and you, the parent, are now getting Social Security retirement benefits or Social Security disability benefits on your own record, or the parent is deceased. If all of those conditions are met, then your son or your daughter can get a benefit on your record. So since your daughter is going to be starting out on SSDI on her own work record, I'll explain what will happen, May, when you retire and start getting Social Security retirement. At that point, Social Security will look at the amount of the benefit that your daughter would qualify for on your work record. Generally, although there are exceptions, that amount will most likely be half the amount of your benefit. If you start getting Social Security retirement at your full retirement age, which is probably somewhere between 66 and 67 years old, then your daughter would qualify for an SSDI benefit on your record that is generally half the amount of your benefit. So that Social Security will figure out how much SSDI your daughter would get on your record. They'll compare that to the amount of SSDI that she will already be receiving on her own record. So there are two possibilities. Either the amount that she would get on your record would be less than the amount she is getting on her own record, or it would be greater than the amount that she's getting on her own record. If the amount that she would get on your record is less than the SSDI she's getting on her own record, she will receive only SSDI on her own record. She wouldn't get anything on your record. However, and this is likely in many cases, if the benefit she gets on your record is greater than the SSDI she gets on her own record, she will actually get two different SSDI benefits. She'll get the benefit on her own record, which she will have started out with. The amount will stay the same. And then she'll get the difference between the two benefits. So a quick example, let's say that she started out getting $800 a month of SSDI on her own record, and then she qualifies for $1,200 of SSDI on your record. She'll keep her own $800 a month SSDI on her own record, and then she'll get a benefit on your record that equals the difference between the two benefits, and that would be $400 a month. the 1,200 on your record minus the 800 she gets on her own record.
Does that make sense, May?
Yes, just a quick follow-up.
Mhm.
Is it correct that, this calculation can come into effect as early as 62 for early retirement?
If you or if a parent begins to get Social Security retirement earlier
Mhm.
than they usually would, before full retirement age, the parent's retirement benefit is reduced.
Right.
And the earlier, the longer before your full retirement age that you start getting your retirement benefit, the more the reduction will be, the lower your benefit amount will be. However, your daughter would still qualify for SSDI, and she would still get the same amount that she would receive if you had started getting your Social Security retirement at full retirement age.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Now,
good.
there are some compelling reasons for most parents to wait until full retirement age to start getting Social Security retirement. One reason is so that the benefit amount won't be reduced, because that benefit reduction is for life. So if your benefit is reduced by, say, 25%, because you start to get it at age 62, that reduction will apply to your benefit every month for the rest of your life. The other reason is that if you, the parent, are working when you're getting Social Security early retirement, there's an additional reduction in the benefit based on your earnings. And that continues until you reach your full retirement age.
Okay.
Now, there's also a way that you can get a higher benefit than you would at full retirement age. You could wait to get your Social Security retirement until as late as age 70. And then if you have started getting it after your full retirement age, your monthly benefit will actually be greater. But your daughter's benefit will not. If you wait until you're 70 to get Social Security retirement, your daughter will not be eligible for SSDI on your record until you start getting your retirement benefit. But the benefit amount she'll get will be the same amount she would have gotten if you started getting your retirement benefit at full retirement age.
Got it. Thank you very much for this information.
You're welcome.
Great. All right, so we have a bunch of questions. All right, so let's start from the top. So when someone starts Medicare as a disabled adult child, what happens to Medicaid?
Okay, great question. When someone gets SSDI, whether it's on their own record or on a parent's record, and Pam is using the term that's generally used to specify the type of SSDI a person gets on their parent's record. It's usually called disabled adult child. When a person gets SSDI and they've been entitled to it for 2 years, they qualify for Medicare. And if they are still receiving Medicaid, if they're getting Medicaid in addition, there's a great program in Maryland that applies to people who get Medicare and also Medicaid. The Medicaid can continue if the person remains eligible, so they can have both Medicare and Medicaid at the same time. And the Medicaid will eliminate virtually all of the out-of-pocket costs that the person might otherwise have to pay for Medicare. Medicare usually involves various monthly premiums, deductibles, co-insurance, out-of-pocket costs. But if a person gets both Medicare and Medicaid in the state of Maryland, the Medicaid wipes out virtually all of those out-of-pocket costs for Medicare, makes Medicare essentially free. So it's a great benefit in Maryland. Also, this is true. I want to make this point for both May and Pam. If you have a son or daughter who starts out on SSI, which automatically qualifies them for Medicaid, that's Medicaid with a D at the end, rather than Medicare with an R at the end. One rule for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public is give very different benefits, very similar names. That keeps everyone off balance. But if you get SSI in the state of Maryland, you automatically get Medicaid. And to complicate things further, in the state of Maryland, Medicaid is also known as medical assistance. And that's rule number 2 for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public, is give each benefit more than one name. That really confuses everyone. But if a person starts out on SSI and they get Medicaid, also known as medical assistance, and then later they qualify for the disabled adult child benefit, that kind of SSDI they get on the parent's record, if the disabled adult child benefit is high enough, it will stop the SSI benefit. But there is a protection that lets that person keep their Medicaid, even though their SSI has stopped because of the disabled adult child benefit. So that's a great way for a person to be able to keep Medicaid if they start out on SSI and then lose it due to the disabled adult child benefit when they become eligible. So they can still keep the Medicaid, and once they qualify for Medicare after that 2-year waiting period, then the Medicaid will wipe out almost all of the out-of-pocket costs for the Medicare.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is, in your opinion, what is the future of disability insurance trust fund?
Okay, I'm not an actuary, and I really cannot give you an informed opinion here, but let me explain the question for any of you who may not be familiar with it. There is a pot of money known as the Social Security Trust Fund that's used to pay Social Security benefits like SSDI and Social Security retirement. It's not used to pay SSI. That comes out of different general federal government revenues, but it is used to pay SSDI, Social Security retirement, and a variety of other Social Security benefits. It is funded primarily by contributions from working people. They pay Social Security taxes on their earnings, and that funds the trust fund. Now, I think everybody knows that there are a lot of baby boomers who have retired or are going to be retiring, and not enough younger workers to pay Social Security taxes to continue the benefits of baby boomers indefinitely. So we always hear about the Social Security Trust Fund running out of money. And every year, the Social Security trustees estimate how much longer it will be before the trust fund runs out of money or runs short on money so that it can no longer afford to pay full benefits to people. There are actually 2 pots of money in the Social Security Trust Fund. One is for retirement and survivors benefits. The other is for disability benefits. And that explains Catherine's question. So the Disability Insurance Trust Fund is the part of the Social Security Trust Fund that's designed to fund SSDI benefits. I really can't predict how long it's going to last. What I can tell you is I may be a Pollyanna about this, but I cannot imagine that Congress, however dysfunctional it may be at any given time, will allow the Social Security Trust Fund to run out of money. They may wait until the 11th hour, but I think ultimately they will come up with sufficient funding. And I think that's true for the Disability Trust Fund as well as the Retirement Trust Fund. Although I think the trust fund for retirees and survivors being larger and representing a larger share of people who vote will probably be the greater priority. But I am not terribly concerned that the Congress will allow that trust fund to run out of money so that people can get full benefits. My concern is how they'll accomplish that. There are a variety of ways they could do it, some more onerous than others. So sorry I couldn't give you a more informed opinion on that, Catherine.
But thanks for explaining that. That was really great. Okay, our next question is, what is the job limit when you receive SSI? What happens if the recipient goes over the salary requirement?
Okay, that's a great question, Crystal. And I think what I'd like to do in order to answer it is pull up a PowerPoint from an earlier session and highlight a few slides in this PowerPoint about how work earnings affect SSI. So bear with me a moment. Okay, so there are some safety nets known as work incentives in the SSI program that are designed to make sure a person on SSI who goes to work for pay will have more money and will come out ahead financially. The first safety net is simply that a person on SSI is almost always better off financially if they work than if they don't work. And the reason is, although their earnings from work will reduce the amount of SSI they get, their earnings will not reduce their SSI dollar for dollar. Their earnings will reduce the SSI by less than half the amount of their pre-tax earnings from work. And an example shows up in the middle of this slide. It says a person who starts out with $943 a month of SSI, which is the maximum SSI in Maryland this year for an unmarried individual, that person can earn up to $1,970 a month in gross wages and still get at least $1 of SSI. So clearly their SSI would be greatly reduced, but not all the way down to zero until they're earning more than $1,970 a month in gross wages. So that may be a lot more than you expected. So, so one answer to the question is, if the person earns $1,970 a month or less in gross wages, then they'll continue to get at least a little bit of SSI. But there are some other safety nets, other work incentives. I'm not going to go into them in great detail, but I'll tell you that a student in school or in a job training course who's under age 22, who gets SSI and works for pay, can earn over $9,200 a year in gross wages and not have their SSI reduced at all. The safety net that accomplishes that is called the Student Earned Income Exclusion. For people who are not students, but who pay for disability-related expenses that are needed at least partly for work, those are called impairment-related work expenses. If a person is paying for those disability-related expenses, Social Security will subtract them from their income, and that lets the person keep more SSI than they would without the impairment-related work expenses. If an individual is blind, they get to subtract virtually all of their work-related expenses, even if they're not needed because of their disability. And that can enable them to keep even higher SSI payments. And finally, there is a work incentive, a safety net called the Plan to Achieve Self-Support, which lets a person keep more SSI while working, oftentimes the maximum $943 a month, instead of having their SSI reduced. And the extra SSI they get to keep, they use to offset expenses to reach a work goal, which could be training, education, tools, equipment, uniforms, computers, childcare, transportation, even buying a vehicle, and a variety of other things. And finally, I'll tell you there's a work incentive, it's my favorite one, that lets a person whose earnings go up high enough to bring their SSI all the way down to zero, lets them still stay eligible for SSI. And you might wonder, well, what good is SSI eligibility if your SSI payment is zero? And there are two things that accomplishes. One is it continues the Medicaid, also known as medical assistance. And number two, if that person should stop work at any point, or if their earnings should drop low enough, they can go right back on SSI payments just by contacting Social Security. You don't have to reapply and start over to get benefits back. So it's a great safety net that essentially means that a person on SSI has nothing to lose working full-time, because they'll be able to keep their Medicaid even if their SSI goes down to zero. And if something happens to their earnings later, they can go right back on SSI without having to reapply. So thank you for that question. It was important.
Okay, great. So the next question we have is, my son gets SSI. When my husband starts to take Social Security, can he get SSDI as well, or does he give up the SSI?
Okay, good question. This will sort of expand a little bit on the answer I gave to May's question earlier. And that is, it depends on the amount of SSDI, also known as Disabled Adult Child benefit, that your son gets on your husband's record. And I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit, but if your son's only income is SSI to begin with, he's not working, he doesn't have any other income, and he's getting the maximum SSI of $943 a month. If the Disabled Adult Child benefit he gets on your husband's work record is less than $963 a month, then your son will still keep at least a little bit of his SSI, and he'll have two different benefits: the Disabled Adult Child benefit, also known as SSDI on the parent's record, and a little bit of SSI. But if the disabled adult child benefit that your son gets is $963 a month or more, then his SSI will stop. His income from the disabled adult child benefit will be too high for him to continue to get any SSI. However, I did mention that there's a protection for his Medicaid in that situation. If he starts out on SSI, then switches to SSDI, or the disabled adult child benefit on your husband's record, then there's a protection that will enable him to keep his Medicaid, even though his SSI would stop.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question says, "Hi, Michael. I'm a support broker and support individuals self-directing their DDA waiver services. Many of those individuals do not work and are or are about to start receiving their disabled adult child benefit when their parents begin drawing from their Social Security. Is $2,000 still the limit, and how do they secure their Medicaid waiver and services if that benefit puts them over the limit?"
Okay, great question, Stephanie. First, let me take a step back and distinguish between two kinds of money that there are limits on in the SSI program as well as the Medicaid program. And the two kinds of money are income and resources. So income is money that a person gets during one calendar month. It counts as income the month it's received, and it's subject to an income limit for the SSI program or for Medicaid. Now, if the person receives income in a month and they spend all of it before the month is over, then none of it will be a resource. But if they don't spend all of it, they still have some of it left over as of the first day of the next calendar month. That leftover amount becomes a resource, and that's subject to the limit on resources for SSI or Medicaid. Okay. So when you're talking about people that you're supporting starting to get the disabled adult child benefit on their parents' record, that disabled adult child benefit counts as income in the month that they receive it, and it's subject to the income limit. So simply receiving a disabled adult child benefit would not preclude a person from getting SSI and Medicaid if that benefit is low enough. Okay. Now, if they get that disabled adult child benefit and each month they spend all of it before the end of the month, which is likely, those benefits are usually not all that high and people may have to spend every cent on their basic living expenses. If that's the case, if all of that money is spent before the end of the month, then none of it will be a resource and none of it will count against the resource limit for SSI, which is $2,000. And most ways to get Medicaid that are for people with disabilities also have a resource limit of $2,000. So, but if the individual is getting the disabled adult child benefit each month and they're not spending all of it, let's say they save $200 a month, each month they get that benefit. Well, eventually in 10 months, they will have saved $2,000. And if they've got that in, say, a regular bank account, that could cause them to go over the resource limit for SSI and Medicaid. and that could cause them to lose those benefits. However, there are some ways that people can save money and not have it count against the $2,000 resource limit for SSI and Medicaid. One way is an ABLE account. That's a special account that's owned by a person whose disability began before age 26. And the first $100,000 they save in an ABLE account does not count against the $2,000 resource limit for SSI and Medicaid. So that's a great way to be able to save money. There are also special needs trusts. Those are special accounts set up to benefit a person with a disability. The money can only be used to benefit the person with a disability, but the person with a disability doesn't technically own the account and they don't control it. Another party, known as the trustee, manages the money and withdraws it only to pay for expenses for the person with a disability. But the money in the trust does not count against that $2,000 resource limit. Neither does a home the person lives in, one car they own, certain burial funds, and some others. So I hope that answered your question, Stephanie, but if not, please feel free to follow up.
Okay, great. So another question, this is actually two people had the same question. Do young adults who receive Medicaid eventually receive Medicare at age 65?
Okay. Do young adults who receive Medicaid eventually receive Medicare at age 65? Not necessarily. To be eligible for Medicare, a person must have either paid enough Social Security taxes on their own earnings to have insured status for Medicare, or they would have to qualify for SSDI on their own record or a parent's record or a deceased spouse's record, and then wait the 2 years to get Medicare. So most young adults with disabilities who are going to be getting some type of SSDI benefit before they're 65 will get Medicare most likely before age 65, oftentimes much sooner than age 65. And that would be true if they got SSDI based on their own work record or on a parent's work record.
Okay, great. So next question, do you recommend people to hire a support broker to help them navigate the SSDI application process?
I am not sure that support brokers would generally consider themselves competent to do that. Support brokers, as I understand it, don't necessarily have special training in how to apply for SSDI or SSI. To apply for SSDI to get help on the front end, there are some services that will, I actually know a couple of benefits counselors who will help advise individuals or families about the SSI or SSDI application process. And Melissa, I'll email you. Well, I think you may already have their names and email addresses. There are two of them.
Okay, will you just
But
email me again?
I'll email you again and then you can send
Sure.
those out.
Yeah,
So
and then I can send them out. Perfect.
these are benefits counselors who would be very competent to help with that process. But they do charge a fee. So you'd want to contact them about that.
Okay, so the next question we have, so it says, is that Medicare A and B, do they pay for the B?
Okay, so Michael, I think you may be referring to a point I made earlier, which was if a person has both Medicare and Medicaid, the Medicaid will wipe out almost all of the out-of-pocket costs for Medicare. And that does include the Medicare Part B costs. There's a monthly premium that most people on Medicare Part B have to pay. It's $174.70 a month for most people. There is an annual deductible. I think it's $230. That's the portion the individual has to pay out of pocket before Medicare Part B starts paying anything. And then there's co-insurance. Medicare usually covers 80% of an expense. Medicare Part B does, and the individual usually has to pay the other 20%. But if that person gets Medicaid in addition to Medicare, they won't have to pay any of those Medicare Part B costs.
Okay, great.
Okay, and I'll tell you, I can read the questions.
Okay, perfect, perfect.
So
Yeah,
it might
thank
save a
you.
little bit of time. Excuse me. So thank you, Melissa. So Lori asks, what is the maximum income allowed while on SSDI? And what happens when some months are under the amount and some months are over the maximum? I wish I could give you a thorough answer to this question, but we just don't have the time. So I'm going to abbreviate it, Lori, and tell you that when a person gets SSDI and they go to work for pay, initially there's a safety net called a trial work period. That's 9 months when they can earn any amount from work and still keep their full SSDI benefit. After that trial work period is over, then Social Security looks closely at the amount the person is earning to see whether they're doing something called substantial gainful activity, or SGA for short. If the person is earning less than $1,550 a month in pre-tax earnings, they will not be considered to be doing SGA. If they earn more than $1,550 a month, they may be considered to be doing SGA, and their SSDI could stop, but not necessarily. There are some subtractions from earnings that are allowed. And after the subtractions are applied, if the remaining amount of earnings is below $1,550 a month, then the person will not be doing SGA and will still keep the full SSDI. Now, so what else did I want to tell you? And for people who meet Social Security's definition of blindness, the dollar amount they would need to earn to possibly be doing SGA is much higher. It's $2,590 a month. And that's simply because blind people have the best lobby. Okay, Catherine asks, what is the name of this program? My son constantly earns more than $2,000 monthly. Catherine, are you saying that your son is earning gross wages over $2,000 a month, or that he's got more than $2,000 a month in assets like money in his bank account?
So I think Catherine asked to raise her hand, so I'm actually going to allow her to talk, so that way.
Great.
Perfect. Catherine, you should be able to talk. Okay, perfect.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Michael, thank you very much for your time tonight.
sure.
Here's the question that this has been up and down. So I get my hand slapped and they reduce SSI and they have a very complicated formula, and then we owe money. and then they take it out over, let's say, a month, 12 months, until he's back up to speed with SSI. And so it's a constant back and forth, because he can earn over 2,000 a month with his job, and then in other months he could earn less than 2,000 a month. It's really a glitch in the system, because we want them to work and we want them to get experience, but there are times when they make over 2,000. So you mentioned this program where they could lose SSI but still receive Medicaid and medical assistance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
'Cause this is
So
something for the
Catherine,
future. Yeah.
let me answer in a few ways.
Okay.
First off, I'm giving you the briefest summary of how work affects these benefits. There are, as you can imagine, lots of deep details to this. And what I recommend you do, if your family member is currently working and
Yes.
getting SSI or SSDI, or if they're actively seeking work, is consult with a benefits counselor. You can get benefits counseling for free by calling the phone number I'm going to put in the chat right now. Okay, so it should be at the bottom of the chat now. That's called the Ticket to Work helpline. And if you explain, my family member gets SSI or SSDI, they're working or they're actively seeking work, can you please connect me with a benefits counselor? They can do that, and there's no fee for that. Okay, so that's what I strongly recommend. Now, if your son is working and getting SSI, the bane of your existence is that his SSI amount can fluctuate according to how his earnings from work fluctuate. And even if you report his earnings, which you should do every month if he's getting SSI, Social Security may still not adjust his SSI payments as they should in a timely way, and he may end up continuing to owe them money. But once he's continued to work long enough and he's eligible for SSDI, then things may get a lot easier for you. Then, as long as his work is not SGA, substantial gainful activity, he'll be able to keep the full SSDI benefit. And that will make your life a lot easier in terms of administrative hassles.
Also, Michael, we had a few questions asking if what you're talking about is the Employed Individuals with Disabilities program.
I'm not talking about the Employed Individuals with Disabilities program now.
Okay.
But that program, which is known as EID for short, Employed Individuals with Disabilities, is one of dozens of different ways for a person to qualify for Medicaid in the state of Maryland. It's for people who are working for pay, have a disability, meet a few other conditions, but don't qualify for Medicaid in some other way. And a benefits counselor can let you know if EID would be a good option for your family member and advise them about how to enroll. Okay, Jane asks follow-up to question about working in SSI. Does the same apply to what happens if someone is on SSDI and goes to work? Okay, well, that question came in before I answered it. Jill asks, how much can one make either working and SSI on SSI or SSDI to still be eligible for Medicare? Okay, good question. To still be eligible for Medicaid, not Medicare. Okay, believe I answered that one as well, Jill. If the person starts out on SSI, their earnings go up high enough to reduce their SSI to zero, there is that protection that keeps them eligible for SSI and keeps their Medicaid also known as medical assistance, going. And that rule, which is known as 1619B, 1619B, Protects people with earnings of up to over $52,000 a year, gross wages. And in some cases, a person can be earning even more than that and still be protected by that rule. Pam says, if SSDI is greater than $963 a month and Medicare has started as disabled adult child, so SSI stops, does Medicaid stop then? No, there's a protection if a person starts out on SSI and then switches to a disabled adult child benefit that's high enough to stop the SSI. There's a protection that lets them keep the Medicaid even though their SSI has stopped in that situation. Okay. Michael asks, do they have to opt in for Medicare Part B? Well, I'm going to assume that your family members who will qualify for Medicare will also be able to get or keep Medicaid, and the benefits counselor will be able to advise you about that. And as long as your family member has both Medicare and Medicaid, they don't have any out-of-pocket costs for Medicare. So they have nothing to lose by enrolling in every part to Medicare. In fact, they'll be automatically enrolled in Medicare Part B unless they decline it. And if they are getting Medicaid, they should absolutely not decline it. Stephanie asks, are benefits counselors only available to individuals who are working? Generally, they're available to individuals who are working or actively pursuing work, for free, at least. The two benefits counselors whose information Melissa will be emailing to you, who can advise you about applying for benefits, can also help you navigate the Social Security system if your family member is considering work. And if your family member has a case open with DOORS, the Maryland Division of Rehabilitation Services, they can get benefits counseling through DOORS, even if they're not yet actively pursuing work. Okay.
I think we're down to Randolph.
Well, I've got a few more here that I'm going to try to answer really quickly.
Okay.
I'm up to Michael Hedgecop. Okay, do you need to contact Social Security to have them bill Medicaid for Medicare costs? Usually you do not. That's supposed to happen automatically. If the Medicare costs are being charged to you, your family member, or taken out of their SSDI benefit, definitely confer with a benefits counselor. They can get that fixed. Heidi asks, Heidi was asking about the Employed Individuals with Disabilities program. And thank you for putting a link to more information about the EID program, Heidi. Okay. And Randolph, my husband only takes Part A of Medicare because we have FEHB benefits. Can my son get Part A and Part B of Medicare once he has had SSDI for 2 years? Yes, your son can get Part A and Part B, even if your husband is only getting Part A. And then Leon asks, do most employers know how to assign hours to part-time employees so they don't go over the income limit for SSI, or when they accept a part-time job, need to work that out and let them know they can't work over a certain amount of hours? Leon, I want to say that this is one of the most important reasons to confer with a benefits counselor, because while it's understandable that you're going to be focused on making sure that your loved one doesn't lose benefits they need, there are these safety nets called work incentives that can ensure that your family member is going to be better off, it's going to keep their medical benefits, And even if they earn enough to lose their cash benefits, there are safety nets that will let them go back on cash benefits like SSI and SSDI quickly and easily if something happens to their earnings later. So, so it's good to know that even if your family member has a great full-time job and they earn enough to have their cash benefits stop, they've got protections to be able to get them back and to be able to keep their medical benefits the entire time.
Okay. Michael, I
and-
think we're going to stop. I think there's
Okay.
one more question, but we're going to stop. But thank you so much.
Okay.
You were so helpful. We knew that this would be a great Q&A. Please join us on Wednesday, June 12th from 7 to 8 to learn about Montgomery County Police resources and community safety. Officer Laurie Reyes from the Montgomery County Police Autism IDD Alzheimer's Dementia Unit will present about community safety such as wandering prevention, MCPD outreach initiatives, and other safety preventions. Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks everybody for coming. We'll also have this recorded and I will post it on the Transition Times page. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa.
Bye-bye.
Bye.